to welcome newcomers. So if you are joining this call for the first time and haven't introduced yet to the community, this is your chance and to say hi. So is there anyone who's joining for the first time and would like to say hi to the community?
Yes, it's
And
my
if you,
first time.
Yeah,
I
Maravan,
would
it's
like
my
to
first
introduce.
time. Yeah. Hey everyone, my name is Saurabh and I'm from India. I'm also graduated this year in computer science. I'm looking forward to competitive to Shri and the concept of Shri.
All right. Thanks for introduction, Saurav. All right. So we missed Miguel. So hi, Miguel. Am I pronouncing your name correct, or I'm just messing it up?
No, that's correct, Miguel. It's my first time here. I recently joined to the collaboration group here. I'm trying to understand all this process, so it's nice to be here. That is
Oh,
everything I have.
amazing. Nice to have you, Miguel. You'll definitely enjoy the call.
Okay, thank you so much.
All right. So I don't think there's anyone else who's joining for the
Yes,
first time.
I'm here.
Is it?
I'm
Oh,
Arup
hi,
Gop. I'm also new here. So basically, currently I'm doing Golang and React, and currently I'm a student of second year engineering. That's all.
Oh, that's great. Meshery also do Golang and React, so you will definitely find a match.
Oh, and then
Okay,
who just introduced? I just missed it.
Arup.
Arup. Oh, very good. Oh, good.
So, hi, Kashif. Kashif is also new here. Kashif would like to say hi.
Yeah, hello everyone. Hello, I'm Kashif from Pakistan. I'm a full stack web developer. I'm new and looking forward to contributing to the community.
That's great. Nice to have you, Kashif.
Thank you.
All right. So, apart from all the newcomers, we also have one more newcomer today who is joining for the first time. So, his name is Five. So, meet Five, who is our intergalactic cloud native hero, and join his journey to the planet Meshery. So, I'll quickly share the link of this in chat. So meet Five and join his journey, who is off to the planet Meshery, and help him with the fuel, help him providing with the fuel of stars. All right. So, and if you haven't started the Meshery repository yet, make sure you give it a star, do share it with your friends, peers, and groups. And next up is if you haven't published your first design to the Meshery catalog, we now have a video and all the steps written in docs.meshery.io. So make sure you check out and do publish a design, and you will definitely receive a tweet from Meshery.io. All right. With that said, we are off to today's topic. So first up, on top of the list, we have Abhi's item. So Abhi would like to take the stage.
Yeah, today I will be talking about this. We will be discussing about conversion from design file format to Kubernetes Manifest and its support in Meshery. So I have already pasted or linked this, discuss forum in the doc. So you might put your thoughts here, and for the next 5 minutes or 10 minutes, I'll be talking about what this is and why do we want to have this conversion endpoint. So first of all, this is what you call Meshery, right? So all the resources that we have, and we are just talking about designs for now, designs or applications or filters that's inside the configuration. So all the things that you have is stored in an internal format that is understood by the Meshery. So if you open any design, for example, envoy-filter.yaml, that is an envoy filter. So if you see this format is what we call design file format. It has all the things that we require for proper deployment of your resources, for visually, showing all the components, and then having all the things that Meshery generally provides around context, context aware, features, support, etc. So as you're seeing, like these things are already put inside there, so it might not be very handy or might not be very good when you have to put this design, or you have to give this design file to someone else who doesn't understand our format, and that's fine, right? So yeah, and that's why we are just discussing about why there is a need for a conversion endpoint that would convert the current design file format to the Kubernetes manifest format. So Kubernetes manifest, as of now, like we all understand Kubernetes manifest. Someone who is new to Kubernetes, someone who is new to Meshery would, I hope, would have already worked with Kubernetes manifest in past, or at least have seen it once. So, and other than that, like they can deploy that Kubernetes manifest without Meshery being available into their cluster. So all these things just put us on the verge of adding, providing this conversion endpoint. So what you're seeing here is a design file format. You can very well leverage this design file format to render something like this, where there are namespaces, envoy filter, and there is a wasm filter. So while this is really cool to do everything visually, you might require some time that you have to send it to a friend who doesn't have Meshery in their local cluster. They want to deploy it, and as soon as possible, for example. So yeah, for this obviously there are different use cases where you would require Kubernetes manifest so that you can directly deploy and apply your manifest files. So please put your thought here, and there is enough write-up that that will give you enough context of why we are doing it. And yeah, so let's discuss about like what are your views on this? Like, do you really think that this is required? What do you think? Should there be any other conversion endpoints like Helm chart or Docker Compose, or what's your proposed solution? Like, how do you look around it, and what do you think might be the caveats to what we are doing right now? And yeah, just your whole holistic thought is required here to proceed with this item. And yeah, this would also be acting as a user research item for us, where we will be checking on you whether you really require this feature or not. So yeah, feel free to get there, put any of your thoughts like around it, and yeah, we can just discuss from there.
All right. Anyone has quick comments, question, or feedback for Abhi?
Yeah, I do. I think that this is probably just the beginning of, of something that's been planned for a while, and that is to transcode, transpile, something to change between formats. There are use cases for a bunch of different formats, for the Pulumi format, for the Terraform format, for the Helm format, for the Customize, for the Docker Compose. There's a bunch out there. And yeah, our ability to convert between them is, was quite helpful for the utility that people will find as they go to bring in the value of a piece of software like Meshery into their existing incumbent systems. If Meshery integrates easily into those systems, that greases the wheels to adoption for Meshery and greases the wheels for people to get at Meshery's value. So if Meshery, it provides a number of things, a long list of things. And yeah, if it integrates into existing systems that people are using, all the better. There's AWS CDK, there's Crossplane, there's a list. Yes, converting between some of them is easier than others. But certainly in this case, as people go to create designs in Meshery, their ability to export those to Kubernetes Manifest would seem like the right starting point, would seem like a base level of support. So Meshery already does this anyway. Meshery already on the back end converts those designs into Kubernetes manifests and pushes them along to Kubernetes. And so the support of this should be really rather quick. It's the thing that's worth discussing is probably documentation around and understanding that Meshery may enhance designs or enhance Kubernetes manifests and provide things inside of Meshery that you can't get inside of Kubernetes, and to try to be clear with people where, if they were to choose to export from Meshery to just a vanilla manifest, that some level of detail might be lost, and that's okay that they're making that choice, but just to help make them aware of it so that if they do re-import into a Meshery system, they'll be aware that they would be losing that info. Instead, they might just choose to export in native Meshery design format. And so the things that are worth discussing are like, what's the priority of the different formats to support? How are we going to present this so how does that influence the design of the API? Probably upfront, not too much, because that can be refactored over time. What is the default format that was natively persisted by Meshery? I don't know that that's an open question. Today, that's a pattern file format. It's a design file format. There may or may not be discussions to be had around where Meshery does this conversion in its architecture. Today, that's in Meshery server. There are open pull requests one open pull request to have Meshery do that in the browser in WebAssembly. And there's use cases there. Those might be worth explaining to others. Largely like input on the priority of what people would like for those supported file formats is helpful. Taking a poll would be great, and facilitating that through the discussion forum would be great. Documentation around what people can expect as they export formats. That's my 2 thoughts, my 2 cents. Anybody else have a perspective? Does anybody else want to work on, or does anyone else know why Meshery might be doing such a conversion in WebAssembly in the browser? If you do, mention it in chat, and if you don't and you want an explanation, then ask it on the discussion forum and somebody will explain it. Good, not hearing anything else, we should go to the next item.
All right, thanks Abhi and Lee. So Antonette, you're up next with your update on adapter deploy and deploy status.
Regarding this update for the ability to deploy and undeploy adapters ad hoc, so what I found out was that the issue that we had was that the Docker wasn't being detected. However, it wasn't being detected because once you run the Docker container, it won't be detected in that point because we don't have the Docker stock being mounted whenever this happens. So I mentioned in Slack about this, whether if you want to continue this route, it's whether or not if you want to give permission to the current user in the main Docker container, and then continue to deploy, undeploy. But if you run natively, make you a setup, make you a build, make server, it works fine at that point. The only thing at this point is that we just need to change the state to make sure that it recognizes that once it's been deployed, to refresh the page so that it can come up instead of having to manually go and add it to the page itself. So those work fine. The other part is just whether or not to go this route of giving permission to the main using the Docker image or try a different route. So that's the current update I have right now.
All right. So anyone has comments, question, and then do you have a PR which points to this particular item?
The only difference is it's just adding a line in the make file to mount the Docker stock. And then once you build the main Docker image, and then you try to go and deploy and undeploy, then you will see that permission denied at that point. So I didn't go any further on it because I understand the security concerns about mounting the Docker stock and letting the non-root user make changes. So I know that we have the option to do Docker and Docker because Docker has that type of image, but still there's still security concerns and whether or not if in the long run that will help, if it helped or if it hurt in the long run. So unfortunately, no, I don't have a PR, but that's what the only change was. Just adding that line, build the image, go into the server, make the changes, add and connect, deploy, and it actually showed up in the log that it attempted to pull the Meshery adapter images, and then it tried to go through, but then its permission denied at that point. So.
All right. Yeah, makes sense. All right. So it looks like no one else has question. So we'll move to next item. That's from Avishkar on role assignment bug. Avishkar would like to share.
Yeah. So there was a bug in the user management table where if you choose a team that you manage and try to assign roles to your team members, it was causing the API call wasn't going through, which was due to a commented section in the code. So I've removed that. The only improvement to be made to this is that currently we also allow selecting the different roles that are above the team admin level. So example, mesh map, curator, and these roles are also available in the dropdown when the team is selected. So this dropdown also needs to be updated to support only the team admin role when a particular team is selected, and all the other roles when the selection is like all where the provider admin can assign roles. And the next thing was this is a small update. This was regarding the content pages not having a loaders in them. So I've added loaders. Actually, they were there, but there was like we weren't rendering it correctly. So I've removed the bug, and now the content page also have a loader when the data is being fetched. So yeah, that's
All right. Thanks, Avishkar. So moving on, next item, that's from Uzair on addition of support to deploy required CRDs.
So this issue is particularly about so earlier what used to happen is despite Meshery shipping with all the components like all the components and their respective schemas and all the configuration options as well, and when you will configure a component and deploy your component on the Kubernetes cluster, if you don't have a required CRD, then you will be faced with error something like dash is not recognized or dash is not present in your cluster, something like that, like this error. So Meshery already has the ability, like all the required information to provision the required dependency, like controllers, CRDs, or operators, but we are not utilizing this or exposing it. So the work done is like to ensure before provisioning a component which requires a which requires a dependency. Before that, the dependencies are resolved, and then that component is provisioned inside the cluster. So if you see, the file that I'm deploying contains istio operator, and I don't have any CRDs for istio operator. So when I will deploy this design, Meshery server will automatically infer that dependency was detected of istio operator, and then it will install the required dependency by applying the Helm chart. And after that particular component like istio operator istio control plane will be deployed. And in this way, like the deployment request will not fail, but instead will succeed, and you don't need to manually apply the operators in your cluster, but Meshery will do it for you. So the default behavior is like the dependency will be resolved. This will be the default behavior, but you can also configure this behavior is by like turning off the preference. So the preference will be available inside this options. So Usman, if he is present, he is working on exposing this behavior in this model. So yes, this was about the auto deploy of operators. Any questions?
All right. There are some feedback from Lee in the chat. If anyone else has questions for Uzair, you can sound off now. All right. Looks
Good.
like
Yeah,
okay.
maybe we should spend a moment on this just to make sure that everybody else understands. One is that when Antonette was speaking earlier, she was talking about Meshery's ability to manage its own containers. So Meshery by default downloads when you install it with, well, all of its adapters. And Meshery server is the core component, and it's capable of managing a lot of different types of infrastructure. It also, as a project, Meshery also has a whole bunch of extension points, a whole bunch, actually. One of those types of extension points is adapters. There are 10 Meshery adapters currently. One of them needs to be retired, and Antonette pointed this out a little while ago, and it's time to archive the open service mesh adapter for Meshery. Even though Meshery can manage lots of infrastructure, it still has a little bit of a challenge self-managing its own containers, its own adapters. The project needs to improve that, because not everyone that installs Meshery needs all of the adapters. They just become overhead. The proposal on the table is to have Meshery install by default with 0 adapters, because there's much that just Meshery server as an individual component can do. To do that, though, we do need to ensure that users have very convenient ways of enabling and deploying Meshery adapters. It should be a fairly native or quick and easy thing for Meshery to do, to like deploy its own containers. If it's capable of deploying many other types of containers, but not its own containers, it's a little odd. For the most part, I think the state that we're in is that Meshery can deploy its own containers into Kubernetes, whether Meshery is running inside of Kubernetes or whether Meshery is running outside of Kubernetes. Either way, I think it is doing that fine. The UI and the state of whether or not those containers are deployed needs improvement. There is state management that for the last year and a half or so, we've talked about enhancing Meshery with Redux. It used to be Redux and Redux Stunk and something else, and now it's mostly just Redux Toolkit. That project needs to happen alongside an upgraded Meshery UI in general. Anyway, I wanted to pause for a moment to reflect on what Antonette was saying, in case people didn't get it, because the lack of questions and comments that we have on the call says to me that maybe not everybody understands quite what's going on. So just a little bit of explanation is hopefully helpful. So there's that. Feel free to discuss amongst yourselves. What Uzair just showed is, well, is quite a step forward. It is also an easy step forward for Meshery. Meshery, as it manages these various Kubernetes resources, when someone decides that they would like to deploy any number of Kubernetes resources, well, depending upon the state of the cluster that they're going to deploy these designs to, Meshery might need to deploy some prerequisites first. So let's say that someone wants to create a Postgres database. They want to run Postgres database on a Kubernetes cluster. They'll probably pull in a Postgres server. Maybe they'll create a persistent volume claim, maybe create some other stuff, but they would at least have that. Well, as Meshery goes to deploy that design and make sure that Postgres and the persistent volume and the persistent volume claim are all up and running and deployed successfully, there may be prerequisites for the particular cluster or clusters that Meshery would be sending this design to. A prerequisite could be a Postgres operator. It just depends on how someone created their design. And that is very often the case, that someone would use an operator to help them manage an application like a database. Very much so. And so that's what Uzair was showing, was there was a particular design that he was using as an example. It had a number of dependencies. It had a number of resources that weren't yet available in the cluster, and he was deploying. And so those dependencies are deployed. It's kind of like if you download, if you download Postgres server into a container locally and run it on your local Docker instance, maybe you want to interact with that Postgres server using the CLI. So maybe something like pSQL, you want to run a command. Well, if you don't have pSQL installed, that's a dependency you need to go install first, and then you can do it. In the same way, Meshery needs to prep those clusters. I am slightly hand-waving over in a couple of my statements. I said that Meshery will deploy missing prerequisites. It's like, well, in this very moment, in this PR, Meshery will deploy prerequisites whether they are missing or not. So there's more to that statement. If that discussion interests you, create a discussion on the forum and let's talk about it. Let's figure out how Meshery can be more intelligent there. But I wanted to offer up a little bit of explanation. Anybody have comments or thoughts on things that we just said?
Sorry, my connection broke, so I didn't get what you said.
Yeah, Manuel, say it one more time. You said what?
I said my connection broke, so I didn't get what you said.
Oh yeah, sure. There's a great answer for this. There is a live stream that is being recorded that you can go back to and listen to me blather on again. I won't make everyone else suffer though. Somebody will share that live stream link with you. As a matter of fact, I think it's right here in Zoom at the upper left-hand corner of Zoom. Yeah, good. For my part, my reflection is that we are way overdue for Meshery to be able to deploy its own containers. Antonette, let's see if we can get the story wrapped up about Meshery's deployment of its own containers on Kubernetes and focus on getting that done well, recognizing the UI may not always show exactly what it should show in the moment. If that's done, we might be able to move forward, acknowledging that when someone deploys on Meshery to a Docker host, that there might be a different Docker file that they would want to use, or just a slightly or a different Docker build, different Docker tag that they might want to use if they want to run a privileged container or something, if that needs to be part of the solution. What I'm trying to say is we don't necessarily have to figure all of it out and have it all super smooth and super well over-engineered in the project. Rather, we can just for those individuals that are competent in this way and where those decisions matter to them, they can figure it out with the information that we would give them. Because they can redeploy Meshery. They can stop their current deployment of Meshery that's running too many adapters, refactor their mesh config, and then restart Meshery. And that's a very straightforward answer. We don't need to overcomplicate the engineering of the project when we already give people that choice. All the last mile there that you would figure out if we did would be, oh, I already have Meshery running. How do I very conveniently, without stopping it on a Docker host, deploy and undeploy adapters? And since there's a security, since that's a hurdle, we can eliminate the hurdle by just not making it an objective, by just saying, great, if you don't want the adapters, stop Meshery, turn off the adapters, start it again, which we already have instructions for. So there's a good way for us to land the plane very quickly on this thing that you're working on. So, yeah, is there any further work in your mind to do on supporting the ad hoc deployment of Meshery adapters on Kubernetes as a platform?
Not from what I've seen, but I can go back and look through again since we're shifting focus to Kubernetes. And I agree with the Docker part. Like if we do have some people that want to not deal with the adapters and they want to deploy their own, they will attempt to try to create their own, which you will have some people that may ask that. They say, hey, can I create my own customized, adapter and whatnot? So yeah, that can open up a can of worms that we probably don't need. But yeah, I can shift focus to Kubernetes at this point. So.
All right. Thanks, Lee and Antonette. So next item is again from Lee, but I think we can cover it later. So let's move to Abdullah's update. So Abdullah would like to present. Do we have Abdullah? Okay.
Yeah, so Abid had created a pull request for displaying connections and their status on the Meshery dashboard. There was a PR required to add API support for this, so I've created an endpoint for that purpose. There needs to be a new Meshery Cloud release for this endpoint to be tested. Once that release is made, I'll test out the endpoint, and then this chart, which Abid has made, will be functional. That's it from my end.
Great. Yeah. And then Abdullah, the connection status, this will be an aggregate status for all connections. Will there be, can you confirm the data that would be sent back in the endpoint?
Yeah, sure. Once the cloud release, I didn't understand your question. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah,
what do you mean by confirming the data?
Yeah, the response, like what would an example response look like?
Yeah, I'll make that change. I'll add that to the PR.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I was hoping right now, actually, just like you're going to send back all statuses and a count of the number of connections for those statuses. Great. But will you also be sending back any other info?
No, I'll not be sending back any other info other than the ones that you've mentioned now. The reason I cannot demo it right now is because we need a new Meshery Cloud release for that to be demoed on Meshery Cloud.
Yeah, no, that's no problem. And that's not what I'm asking. Good. Well, what about if someone wants to break down of that across specific clusters or specific groups, like a specific type of, like if they have, 10 different Prometheus servers, maybe they want to break down only for that technology. It doesn't have to be addressed here. I'm just wondering if the consideration for those two questions have been made by Kubernetes.
Right. Yeah, I understand your question. So right now, this PR I've made in consideration for adding support to this chart. But the kinds of the PRs, the endpoints that you mentioned can be done. But I was thinking they can be made as and when they are required. There is a very large number of ways in which we can support fetching data in terms of connection types, in terms of statuses. There's quite a wide variety of ways in which we can fetch connections by their types, by their statuses. And what I thought was they can be created as and when they're required, instead of preemptively going and creating them.
Yep, makes sense. I agree. I agree. That's not really to my question, though. My question is more like, has thought been given to that, or what would it look like if those were to be created? And if you're misthinking about the actual question that I'm asking, it would sound like I'm badgering Abdullah over like, wait, I thought we just said we would create them when we needed them. Why do we need to think about them now? It sounds like, it doesn't sound like a good line of questioning. Actually, that's not really what I'm getting at. What I'm getting at is, as you architect something, what you do want to do is a little bit of chess playing. And I'm not necessarily telling Abdullah something that he doesn't necessarily know, but just sort of saying it aloud for everyone else not to think that I'm a total jerk for harassing Abdullah. That's not the point. The point is, okay, gosh, just for a moment, if we entertain this thought for a few minutes as you first do it, it might be that we can avoid painting ourselves into a corner where we would have to do breaking API changes in the future to facilitate those potential use cases. If we think about it for a few minutes or so now, we might be able to say, oh, well, if we just made this, well, if we just included that or excluded or put the endpoint not there, but here, we would still achieve the mission, the objective right here, and it wouldn't have to be something we would have to refactor in the future to answer the other questions. And so even though we're not going to answer the other questions right now, and that's why I'm asking.
Yes, I did give some thought to that. And if we decide to return additional information with this endpoint, the way in which I've structured it, adding that additional information, returning that additional information with this endpoint would not break anything in the future. I could go into more details about how that would be done, but since I do not have an example response right here, it would not be very clear as to if I will just explain it verbally, it would not be very clear. But I have given thought to like what the future proofing of this endpoint.
Nice. So it's not that we would necessarily something to ponder on. It sounds like it would be ill-advised to have a status endpoint on something like the MeshModels API, because those are in concept inanimate objects, inanimate resources, whereas an animate resource is a connection. And if you did want to know about the status, this type of a status with respect to just a single Kubernetes cluster and maybe all that it contains, we would be doing that within the connections API. So that makes sense. It's that question of not really, like you can imagine what would happen if you wanted to get to connection status for a single cluster. You could just say, hey, is that cluster reachable? Great, you might have a connection ID, the cluster ID, and then /status, or not even /status. You might just return status as part of retrieving a particular connection. But the subsequent question of like, well, that's great that cluster is reachable. Now, what I wanted to do was break down all connections and their status for that cluster. And what would that API structure look like? That's a good one just to do a quick draft of.
So
maybe
currently in the latest PR, which I merged in Meshery Cloud, so I've added support for fetching connections through their IDs. So in the future, if we decide to, maybe add support for fetching connections through their status, it can probably a query that looks like this. Or maybe you mentioned fetching by the type of the connection. So for that, currently we have connection kind. And if you wish to filter by both the kind and status, that can probably a query on this endpoint. So by using a combination of queries as well as path parameters, we can add support for the kinds of functionality that you just mentioned.
Thank you. I'll follow up in it. Good. I believe you. That doesn't answer the specific question, but yeah, thanks. Good. I get it. Nice. This is good.
All right. Thanks, Abdullah. So Freedisch, you're up next. Would like to share?
Sure. Okay. So, okay. Wow. So there is this particular API endpoint. Can you? Wow.
Sorry to interrupt, but your screen is black.
Yeah. It's actually stuck.
Oh.
So okay, sorry about that. So basically, there is I added Meshery Cloud actually needed in Meshery Cloud there is an endpoint to retrieve users' keys. Okay, so that's it. Okay, good. So in Meshery Cloud there is an endpoint to retrieve users' keys, and which was actually not present in Meshery, and that's actually what I added. So yeah, that's it. And actually that endpoint needed to be there for this PR actually to be merged. Yeah, this is just a quick update.
Great. So Thibaut, did you replicate that API in Meshery server then?
Yeah. That's what I did.
Nice. That's great.
So yeah.
All right. Thanks, Freedisch, for the quick update.
Sure.
So moving up next, we have an item from Ananya. So Ananya, would like to share updates?
Yeah. So this is the relationship definition that I'm trying to push right now. The definitions of which I already created in this document. However, it is not yet approved, but I thought I'd create the relationship definitions regardless so that we can move forward with them. I think the part that Lee is mentioning here is regarding the registration for new relationships definition, which I think are actually handled by the server here. We are making a post request if I'm not wrong, and storing the relationships inside the MeshModel summary channel. Not sure if this function is the sole handler for new relationships, but I was hoping Uzair would enlighten me on this. But apart from this, I don't think I found the part where we are adding the context awareness part of the mesh map here just yet. Yeah, so what are your thoughts?
Uzair, do you have feedback?
So for your question, like, so any relationship added under MeshModel/relationships will be auto-registered when Meshery server boots. So So this will be registered. And I have not seen your definition actually, so I cannot comment on that. But for your question, yes, it will be registered. So if you see the in the main.go file, there will be a function which is running the Go routine, seed relationships. So you will get an idea from there. Yeah, I'll check it out.
All right.
Cool. Good. I can't help myself like that. There's a bunch of people on the call that are probably asking, what are these guys talking about? I'm not really sure. There's it's probably important. It's important that what Thibaut was showing a minute ago on Freedisch is, well, and what Abdullah was showing a second ago, both of these guys are doing enhancements to Meshery server's REST API. And Abdullah conveyed, I think, clearly why it is that he was making changes to enable some aggregate level dashboards, which are pretty cool. And the API design that he has makes a lot of sense. For Freedisch, he is, God, what's another word for replicate? Mirror? Yes, he's mirroring an authorization endpoint. So it's kind of an interesting thing that Meshery server does authentication of a single user. It doesn't do authorization itself. I'm not using the local provider. If you're using a remote provider like Meshery Cloud, they can do authentication and authorization. In order for them to do that, Thibaut and Usman and others are making sure that Meshery server, as it's shipped, comes pre-built with baked-in authorization keys. It's a pretty interesting concept, and the way that that is extensible, kind of cool. Actually, it might create some new noodles in your cranium if you talk to Thibaut and try to understand why he's doing what he's doing. He might even go to understand it better if you ask him some questions about it. So, but here for Ananya, he's working on MeshModel and he's bringing forth some new relationships. These are quite important. If you ask Meshery to manage different types of Kubernetes infrastructure, you can see some examples that he has listed in the lines here. He's got a Kubernetes pod, a Kubernetes. Yeah, the model is lowercase, right? But the kind is uppercase. Huh.
Yeah.
And be careful. We have to make sure we're being careful. But anyway, he's got some commonplace resources: Kubernetes pod, deployment, service. Those are super common. Every time that you go to interact with Kubernetes, you'd probably touch one of those three. And then he's got a list of others as well. And what he's defining here is how it is that Meshery, as a piece of management software, treats each of these resources in how they relate to one another. So how does a pod relate to a deployment? Well, I'll tell you, you have many pods inside of a deployment there. But how do we codify that and tell Meshery how to represent that? Part of what he's doing right here, he's specifically trying to get to a point where what he's saying is, a lot of times you might use a resource called a config map, and you might have that config map applied to any number of other resources. You might want to apply runtime configuration to any number of these other Kubernetes resources. And so he's codifying how it is that a config map can or cannot relate to other resources. And when it can, in what manner can it, or in what manner does it mutate or modify these other resources, or how should that be represented? And that's what he's getting to. And what Ananya, I think, so this is very healthy. This is exciting for me to see, at least. That is that you're attempting to define a new subtype called configurational. And so let's talk about that. Not now,
Yeah,
but let's have an open discourse. This is great.
Sure.
but I just, everybody else that wants to participate in the conversation, now you've got the right level of context to come on in and have a discussion with Ananya about what he means by configurational and how he thinks that what other rules should be applied to this specific relationship. So it's pretty intriguing. How should it be visually represented as well? Interesting. In this case, for my part, I don't think that we'd need a new subtype here. I'm encouraged that you are defining new subtypes. Probably it's not necessary. I don't know. It might be necessarily only to the extent that you intend for it to be visually represented in a different way. And so, Ananya, did you have something in mind as to how you think that might be visualized?
So what I did in the document was to classify the Kubernetes objects into the inherent property that they provide to other resources. Like config map is just there for providing configuration to other objects. And in similar way, I divided other classes as well. And I was thinking that those classes can represent the subtype for different kinds of relationships.
Okay, yeah, that intuitively makes some sense. You're saying, to kind of repeat that back, like if for some of the relationships, so gosh, it would be nice. Does anybody have the playground up? If we could kind of look at this visually so that everybody else can follow along. Ananya, you don't have the playground up either. Sign in there. I could sign in if that helps. Because I think everybody on the call here, I'll sign in. You know, I think everyone else on the call can have an opinion about this. I think that UIs in general, whether it's a CLI or a UI like this, everyone's opinion is valid. Everybody has an opinion. Everybody moves their mouse across things. And you do it all day long. If you're like me, you sit on your butt almost all day and do this. That's terrible. Terrible for your body, but you can have an opinion because you're doing it all day. Now, you may not have a very good opinion, or you may have a really excellent opinion. Either way, I'm asking all of you that are on the call right now to please consider this. And as you think about it, if you have thoughts now or later, please contact Ananya and have a discussion with him. So to recap, what he's doing is he's identifying the fact that there are existing relationships between nodes right now. One of those relationships looks like this. If you're in Kubernetes, you have these very commonplace resources. You have a service and a deployment. A service really represents sort of a networking. It represents networking. And network traffic might go through this service to reach a deployment. So we were talking about Postgres earlier. Maybe if your Postgres database is running in this deployment and you want to allow users to make SQL queries to it, you might do so, and you might do so over, I don't know what the port is for Postgres, something like that. Great, so now users can send that traffic. So now this component and this component are relating to one another. How are they doing that? Through this edge relationship. This edge relationship is of subtype network. And because it's of subtype network, you can configure it with different protocols and different ports all the way up to, who can tell me what the highest port number is? Come on, for all the money in the pot. What is it? I know Ananya's got ChatGPT up. Ask it really quick. Can you type it out fast? Can it respond before Lee says 65,543, something? Oh, Antonette. Yeah, very good. She was fast on the keyboard too. Antonette's the winner. Yeah, so anyway, if you try to type in something. So as Ananya defines this sort of a thing, if someone tries to be a wise guy and type in 900 million, blah, 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 it'll stop you right here, right where Antonette had said. which is great. That's because that's embedded into, it's codified in this type of relationship. So what Ananya is saying, well, great, we have other constructs in here. Let's take a config map. And that's what he has taken a config map. And he's saying, well, for a config map, if we have one in here, maybe it's config space map, yeah. We have one of these. All right, how can it relate to this? At the moment it can't. It can't. That's why he's defining a new relationship. Okay, and that's what he's exploring right now. He's saying, look, hey, as I'm learning Kubernetes, and I understand that a config map commonly stores this configuration that you might want to apply to any number of resources. Like almost all of them have a use case for receiving runtime configuration, and so he's saying, this is kind of a different type of relationship. It's not a network-based thing. So I'll go ahead and this is where it makes intuitive sense to me that he would do this. And he's saying, I'm going to identify the fact that it is applicable to many different types of resources. And, but it's different than, it would be inappropriate to say that there was a network-based relationship. So he's just saying, I'll just make up a new one. Now, how that gets visually represented, whether that's a line or whether it sits inside of something or whether it sits in the inventory of something like this one, that's what I'm asking all of you. That's the question to all of you. How do you think that something like configuration should be visually represented on, if it were to be applied to this service? Because maybe this is an SSL cert, and I want to apply that SSL cert to my service. This is not the best example, but play along with me. If I wanted to, well, would that be represented visually? What do you think? Should that be something like this? So if I drop this onto here, would it show up on the edge? Would it show up down inside of here? Should it show up inside of the thing, kind of like this? Thoughts, feedback. Remember, all of your.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
I was wondering, is it just this blue color that is used here on this particular canvas? Can other colors be used? Because if other colors can be used, then possibly we can have different color codes, just like the one, that little circle where the deployment is. I don't know the terminology, but where the deployment is, we can have something similar, but in this case for the different relationship that you just defined for the config map. So possibly we can have them like that, different colors representing different relationships. I don't know if that makes sense.
Oh yeah, that's great. It totally does, right? Because gosh, that really frees us up to reuse something like this line, like this edge-based line. Well, great. So if it's a purple line, then that means config map, or that means, or if it's solid, not dashed, or if it's dashed, not dotted or something. Yeah, makes sense to me. More thoughts. This is just, nobody can have a wrong answer on this.
Hello?
Yeah.
Okay, basically, I typed the question, I typed an answer there. Being that we are trying to use a config map to fit into the Kubernetes design for the mesh map, why don't we use a sidecar design pattern?
Yeah.
That is one, because what we just want to do in this particular scenario is to bring about a dependency injection, okay, with respect to the process. So we can write being that we have envoy proxy, that is envoy filter already running in a Kubernetes cluster. We can bring in a sidecar pattern, and we can inject the config map, because if you look at it very well, what we want to achieve is just basically, okay, a policy with respect to the connection between the service and the pod. That is my thoughts on it.
Yeah, Raphael, let me repeat that back to you if I could to make sure I, by the way, just this might be more comical than anything else, but yeah, here's an example of how some of us were thinking about representing a sidecar in the past. Probably not the best way to represent, but yeah, so specific to, I'll say a couple of things and you'll help qualify if what I'm saying is is accurate in terms of what you were trying to convey. So here, if this is, let's say that this is a running deployment, that this maybe is on, in this case, maybe it's on a service mesh. And so maybe that service mesh is, maybe it's Istio. It has sidecars on the container or the containers inside the deployment, that that one of the ways that we were considering representing that sort of a sidecard container, one of the ways was like, as in the inventory of the thing. In this case, this is technically this is a configuration of a sidecar, and the configuration of that includes a WASM filter. So we're a few levels deep at this point, but to visually represent the sidecar, say a little bit more. Are you thinking not necessarily something like this, but maybe something more like it hanging off the edge like this, like there would be, or are you thinking like, hey, inside of the pod, you might have a circle, a couple of containers, a circle for your workload and a circle for your sidecar? Or what are you thinking?
In terms of what I'm thinking, we have a service, we have a pod. Pod is supposed to run a single process. And being that we have an envoy proxy, that's an envoy filter running outside with a WASM filter, okay, that is situated outside. Now, the way that the design pattern for this particular mesh map, I would like it to be that for the envoy proxy, that's envoy filter, let the sidecar run attached to the particular envoy filter outside this box that is serving both the service as well as the deployment. That is what is in my mind as regards to the design, because the way I'm going to look at it, we might have up to 5 or 6 squares in terms of Kubernetes resources that is running in the Kubernetes cluster, and with the envoy filter as well as the sidecar running outside, it can be injecting, okay, the rules, the policy into all the pods. That is my design concept in this.
Oh man, I'm having a hard time with my mouse. Got you. Yeah, I got you. Part of what you're highlighting is that the fact that specific to the use case of running Envoy filters inside of your sidecar, your proxy sidecar, that maybe you have multiple filters in a filter chain. And so one of the ways you might visually represent something like that would be, in your mind, might be not necessarily the way that it's being represented right now, but as separate entities. I wanted to highlight this in case it helps or in case this is close to what you're thinking of. To the extent that there is a sidecar that has one or more filters loaded, the way that it's represented right now, for better or worse, is that you drop one in and that X number of them show up like this. But I'd be really curious to, if you just did like a quick drawing on pencil and paper or something, or wherever, I'd be really curious to capture that note, or if you want to do it in Figma, that would work, wherever. Raphael, that's exactly what I was asking for. I mean, this is great. This is great, man. Particularly, Raphael, it's really helpful. Like if, as you've already maybe dealt with some of this infrastructure previously, and you already have a mental model for how you think of that infrastructure, you know, you just, in your mind, you sort of imagining it looking like a certain thing or relating in a certain way. That's the kind of thing that's super helpful. So this is super helpful. If I don't hear from you later today, or if we don't see it, I might try to just do a quick drawing of what I think you're saying and send it over. That's awesome. Who else? Anybody else have ideas about the way that some of these are represented? We need to get together just a list of all of the various ways that relationships can be defined. There's only like 7 or so of them ish, somewhere in there. We need to have those on a page so that people can see them now and then can start to ideate about, well, comment on the ones that are there, maybe get them changed, but also ideate about other ways. And to Rex's point, it's like, gosh, wouldn't it be nice if there was a design system for what does it mean to have a green background with a blue dashed line? Recognizing that there are some of us that are colorblind and that accessibility is always a challenge. Recognizing that, still there's much to be conveyed, much semantics that can be conveyed through color. And we will never get away from that. We will always convey some things through color. We might, to be fully accessible, we might have to help people with some other indicator, but it's pretty universal that red is bad, green is good, blue is neutral, gray is probably disabled. And then people are having to deal with that already. And so, other thoughts, I'm trying to be quiet while other people might have suggestions on how a config map gets represented. Or you might have suggestions on like, or questions like, hey, these things look, I don't know what they are, but they don't all say the same thing. So why are they all circles? What are all of the possible choices? Well, there's a lot, actually. There's a link to that we need to publish as well that says it can be a rhombus, a trapezoid, an isosceles triangle, blah, blah. What are all of the different shapes that are supported? The project really does need your help in that regard, because there's all kinds of things. Like here, many of you use GitHub. We use all kinds of GitHub workflows. Should it be a circle? Should it be a runner? What will a runner be? Some of you might be saying things in chat. I mean, I know we're over time, so I'm gonna stop sharing, but just that type of discussion, that type of discourse is fantastic. Hopefully one of the maintainers will, or a couple of them will send out some links to like, what are all of the supported shapes of the colors that are being used now? What meaning has been imbued to some of them so far? If there's dashed and dotted and solid lines and things like that, what is that? Like, what are the existing relationships? How are they visualized? So where are we at right now? And I'll tell you, like, out of all the things that we need to do for this, we're about here. There's a lot more relationships and colors and all that stuff to be defined. So some great feedback from Raphael and Rex. Let's be sure that we facilitate that discussion, that we get that info out so people can think about it a bit. Some good work, Ananya, getting people all excited.
All righty. So do drop your comments on Discuss Forum or on Slack. So with that, it's time to wrap the call. It was a good call. So make sure you subscribe the community calendar. So this week we have build and release meeting on Thursday, which will be hosted by Pranav. So if you're interested in GitHub Actions, CI/CD, workflows. So make sure you join this. And if you didn't got your fill today, so make sure you join the newcomers meeting. That's again on Thursday. So do press this big fat yellow button to get all the meetings on your Google Calendar. So with that, thanks all for joining. We'll meet you next week, same time, same place. Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Sorry. Hello?